Hello and welcome back to the next video in this series on building a new tab Notes Chrome extension. So in the last video, we started to add in the functions to fetch our notes from the database. So in this video, we're going to be finishing off the extension and continuing on from where we left off. So the next things we need to work on is this change page functions. When we click on our notes over here, it fills up the content of our page with our note. We're also going to be making this new note button here, create a new note onto our page, and we'll be adding buttons over in the corner to delete our note as well. So let's jump straight into it and start working on these new changes. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is update a little bit of our CSS. So as we can see over here, we have this blue text here, which isn't quite what we want. So let's just make sure this is flexible to work whether we have light mode or dark mode, and later on in the video I'll show you a little bit of code you can use so that you use the actual system default. So if they've already got dark mode on their computer, it will take that by default and vice versa. So first let's go and change these bits of code. So down here where we have our CSS, we're looking for this placeholder empty before part of it just here, and we're going to change this from blue to inherit. So if we save that now and refresh, we can see that this is adjusting. So there it is in light mode, and if we switch it to use dark mode, we can see that it works for both types. So that's great. So let's go back to our code here. So we're going to scroll down, and first we need to add in some buttons for our save and delete actions, so we can use these later. Then this will be all of the actual part of our HTML complete. So down here where we have our to add our action buttons, just underneath this icon here, we want to replace this area here with two buttons. So the first one will be save, and the second one will say delete, and we're just going to add a class here of save page, and on delete, it'll be delete page. These will both be hidden to begin with. So if we go back and refresh now, we can see that these buttons are over here, but our new class there that says hidden will make sure that if we're on a new note like this, that we can't actually see them. So we only want these buttons to be shown when they should actually be there. So we're going to add some new CSS now to actually make this change work for these buttons, but also to change the display of our sidebar a little bit as well. So let's go back to our new tab.html, scroll up to our CSS, and underneath this placeholder part of the CSS here, we're going to add some new items. So the first one is for our ULs. This is where we list all the different notes that we have on the page. So we're going to remove all the padding and all the margins, and we're going to remove the list style type to be none, so that removes the bullet point on the corner. Next, we want to set the styling for our new note button, and also the list elements, so basically all of our different notes. So we're going to add a padding top in here of 5 pixels, and a padding bottom. We want the cursor to be a pointer, and a padding left of 5 pixels as well. So let's just save that and have a look. So there we go, it starts to organize it a bit better over there. And then we want to add a hover event so that these look more clickable. So we're going to do the exact same thing. So new note, hover, UL ally active, and UL ally hover. And then all we're going to say is background color. We use an RGBA, like this. So it's a RGB, so the color we want to use is black there, and then we're going to set the alpha, so the opacity, to be 0.5. So if we hover this now, we should see, yeah, we have this little effect. Okay, so now we want to add the styling for our save and delete buttons we just made. So we'll go down a little bit more as well. First we want to say delete page. We're going to set a margin right of 15 pixels because that's going to be on the right hand side of the screen. And then for both our save page and delete page. We want to set some styling. So we want to float them both to the right. We're going to set padding of 10 and 20 pixels on the left and on the top. We're going to set a background color of transparent, a border radius of 3 pixels, and we want to set our border to be 2 pixels and solid. Almost done. We're going to set a color of white, and we're going to make the font weight bold. Okay, so let's just have a look at that now. So you can see over here, let's just change it to dark mode to see how it appears on there. So all we need to do that is go up to our body over here and just put a class of dark just whilst we're working on this. So we can see there's our buttons over there. And again, if you want to change the design of any of these parts, feel free. This is just an example bit of styling to get us started. And then we just want to set a hover effect on both of these buttons as well. So to do that, we're just going to put hover, and then we're going to say background white, color black. So you can just see a little bit of styling there when we hover across. Okay, so that's almost all the CSS. We just have a couple more parts to add. So we're going to add our hidden class, which is just going to say display none. And then we're going to adjust our post body just to add a bit of, so it fills up the area on the page there. So we're going to say min height 100 pixels and width 100%. So if we refresh this now, these buttons should disappear. And our input field, if we just check, hang on, I used the wrong class name there. So make sure this is post dash body. So the reason we're adding this is, I don't know if you saw just there when I tried to click into it, when there's no text inside this box, it's quite small and difficult to select. So you want to make sure that users have a nice area they can click onto, so it will still open up and work with this box. So as you can see now, this area is much easier to click on. Yeah, so we've set that sort of size so far. So it's a good clickable area. Okay, so that's all the styling so far that we need. So let's go in and start working on our JavaScript. And as you can see here, this is the code we have so far. So we have our fetch notes function, then we're listening for clicks. We're starting our fetch notes function just here. So this is where we initialize the actual display of our notes. And then we have our functions here for clear note and change page. So that's what we need to work on next. So the change page function will actually, when we click on our note over here, we need to update the title, the icon, and the body with our actual note information. So let's work on that now. The first thing we need to do is grab the actual data for our note. So what we're going to use is we're going to set an object just here, and this is going to find the data for our note from the window object we made up here. So we're going to say window notes, and then get the note ID. So if we do console log object and click the button again now, so we just inspect element, click our note, we can see here is the data for our note just here. So that's what we're going to be using. So we're going to go across now and update our page. So this is just going to be a list of query selectors and then update the HTML or the inner HTML of these elements. So we're going to start by saying document query selector, and then we're going to say holder icon inner text equals object.icon. So we'll just test this first one and then I'll type out the rest. So if we click onto this, you can see it's updating our icon up the top there. So the next one is our header, so our h1, and that would just be object title. And then the next part is the data set of our title. So again, that'll be h1. This is where we're going to put in the note ID so we can use this for saving and deleting later on. So we just update that by saying dataset note ID, and I'll show you where this goes as well. So that would just be note ID. So we'll just have a look at where that goes. So if we see up here where we have our H1, this is what it looks like at the minute. And if we click onto our first note, it updates the title here, but you can also see we have our data note ID information here as well. So we can access this and work out what note we're working on. And then all we need to do next is update the post body. Like that. We're going to set the inner HTML this time because users could have bolded some parts or put italics, and we need to make sure that we pass in all the HTML that they've saved here. So for that, we're just going to say object body. So if we refresh our page now and click on our note, we can see we have all the information just here. And if we were to change this in our database, say we make this one bold, for example, and then go back to our page and click refresh, you can see it's updated and got this bold display here. So that is our notes appearing on the side of the page. But there's a couple more things we need to add to our change page function. So if we just go back to it, we can see just down here, what we need to do next is update the status of our note to show which one is active, so that we can make it have this hovered display like this. So first, before we just apply that styling, we need to make sure we go through all of our notes and remove any existing styling. So we're going to loop through them all like this. So we're going to make a variable of all of our list items. We're going to say document query selector all, and we're going to say ul li like that. So we've grabbed all of our notes, and then we just do a simple for loop. Also inside of our for loop, we're going to add a try block just in case there's any errors. We don't want this to break our function. Just put catch e, we can always log this later. So inside here we want to say li's and then get our active one, and we're going to say class list remove active. So that's basically looping through all of our list items and removing this active class. And then underneath this, we're just going to set our current one to have this class. Okay, so this is what we're doing here. To select this item, we're going to again use our list items here, and then we're just going to access the active one by using the data set again, so the data set we used a minute ago, but this time for our actual list items, and then use note ID, and then pass through our variable just here, so that will access this item. Then we say class name equals active. Just be sure to put a capital N just there. So we're almost done with this function. Let's just check that this works. So if we click onto this now, we can see it adds this styling just here. So that's great. But then underneath here, we want to make sure that we're showing the delete button now and the save button. So if we go document query selector again, so we want to save page and delete page, we're just going to say style display is block, and we put that on both. And then finally, we just want to set into our local storage the active item so that when we open our new tab again, it remembers the note that we were last viewing. So we do this by just saying local storage set item, and then for this we've said notes last open page, then we just pass in note ID. That will also stop this error message we have just here where it says can't read the property click of null, where it's looking up to see have we got any items saved from our last view at the minute. So if we refresh this now, click onto this, then refresh again. Did I save this? No. That will help. So if we go back here, click onto this item, then refresh our page. As we can see up here, the reason this isn't working is because up here in our listen for clicks, or is it down here, we're saying date, not data. So if we fix that and save it, that'll fix this issue we had just there. So if we refresh now, we can see that it's pre-selecting this one here. So it remembers which one's been selected. So that is everything we need to add for our change page function. So the next thing we need to do is create our clear note function, which is basically for when we want to click on the new note button just here. So before we do that, we're going to go just before we have our listen for clicks function and just make some space. And we're going to set some click events. So the first event we're going to add is for this new note thing here. So we're going to say document query selector new note, and then add event listener on click. Okay, so in here all we're going to call is clear note. So we want to make sure that these events as well are only called once per page. So we don't want to have any multiple clicks happening here when we're trying to click it once. So if we scroll up here and just add a console log again, and then if we refresh our page, just need to fix this here to add a dot just here. So if we click onto our new note now, we should see that it's saying clear note. So what this basically needs to do is clear out our icon. So we'll take it back to the default icon, clear out our title, clear out our body, and then we can make sure that we have our delete and save buttons added again. So if they've only just opened the page, we need this to be added on there as well, but so it's save rather than delete. So you can only save a new note. Okay, so in Atom, we're going to add our new note function now. So this event listener will call clear note. So up here we have the start of our clear note function just here. So we're going to remove this console log first and replace it with the data we said a moment ago. So the first we need to do is remove the delete button. So we do that by saying query selector, delete page, style display is none. So that will remove the delete button first. And then we want to set our new title, our new post body, our new icon back to the default one, and then to update the note ID, so the dataset part we mentioned a moment ago. So what we need to do here is completely remove that attribute from the H1, so that when we go to save it, if we find that the data of the note ID is empty, then we can generate a new one when we submit this to Firebase. So Firebase can make sure that this is a completely unique ID. So all we need to do here is just remove that attribute. So let's start by getting rid of the title. So that is the H1, just make sure you have a dot there before holder. So then all we need to do is say inner text is empty. And then we're just going to copy this a couple of times. So we're going to next grab the post body and set that inner HTML empty for this one. And then the icon, we want to set that to our default icon. So you can use any emoji you want here that will be your default, like this. And then finally, we're going to remove that note ID that we mentioned a moment ago. So to do that, it's the same as before. So we want to get the H1, and instead of adjusting the inner text, we just say remove attribute data note ID. So let's just double check. Okay, we haven't got this dot here, so it's not acting as a class. Yeah, so make sure you add this dot here so that it's acting as a class, and then save, refresh, new note, and there we go. So let's just make sure that our H1 is updated. So we can see at the minute it's not properly changing here. So what's the problem? It's because we have remove event listener, autofill not working there. There should be remove attribute. So if we save that, refresh, check the console log as we do this, says our note ID, click new note, we can see it's properly removed that. So now we have our new note and our note change, or the change page functions working nicely. So next we need to look at how we can save our notes and add these into the database. So we need to add a new function into our Firebase.js to either create a brand new note and give us the new note ID, or to update our existing notes. And then all we need is a delete button, so that our delete button has, or a delete function, so that our delete button can call this and then delete the notes. So next we need to make sure that we have click events for our delete button and our save button, and then as we mentioned, create the functions in our Firebase.js file to connect this all up. So let's start by going down here to where we have our event listeners to add one of these for the buttons that we just mentioned. So first we're going to add one for our delete button. So that is delete page. And then we'll just copy all of that and paste it and just change delete page to save page. Okay, so this is going to be the two buttons that will delete and save our content. So what we need to do first, if we're saving our page, let's start with this one, is we need to check and grab all the information possible from our note. So we need to set a number of variables. So first we want to get the title, then we want to get the body of the post, so the content in there. We also need to get the icon, and then finally we need to get the note ID. So, and after we've got all of those, we're going to create a new function at the bottom called save page, and then we'll pass all of this information through. So that'll be ID, title, icon, and the body. So let's start by actually grabbing all of this information. So if we go up to our clear note function just here, we can get the title by doing this. So if we go down here and paste, and then the same thing for the post body, we just change that to post body and then change inner text to inner HTML. For the icon, same thing for the icon, we go up here and grab that. There we go. And then exactly the same for ID, just here, we'll grab it like that. There we go. So that's all of the information grabbed, and it's going to get sent to our save page function. So we'll create a function for that down here. And that's where we make all of the checks on this content before we go and send it to the database. So next we need to make sure we have the information for our delete page. Now we don't just want to delete this straight away, we want to make sure that we ask the user, are you sure that you want to delete this? So we do that first by creating a confirm, we call the confirm function on the window. So that's what we'll create next. So we're going to set a new variable in here called confirm, and this will be equal to window confirm, and then in here we put our message. So we'll just say, are you sure you want to delete this note? And then put a question mark there. And then all we need to do to check if they said yes or no is just put an if statement just here and put if confirm. And then if the confirm was true, so if they said yes, then we'll run our code in here. If they cancelled or said no, we won't do anything. So we only move forward if they say yes. And then we're just going to use our Chrome runtime again and send a message to our background page. So the command we're going to be using is delete note, and then we're going to pass in the data of our note ID, so the note that we want to delete. And then what we need to do is make sure we listen for a response from this function. So that's what we have just here. And then we create a callback for this in there. So this is where we'll get the response from our background page that lets us know when this note has been deleted. So once that note has been deleted, we need to do a couple of things. We need to update our sidebar of notes, and we need to sort of refresh the note that we're showing on the page. So to do this is quite simple. We just need to fetch notes again, like that. So that will run the call to the database to fetch all our notes. And then we just need to say clear note. So again, we're removing the current note that's been selected. So that's all we need to do just there. But first, we need to grab the selected note. So up here, as you can see, we're using a variable here called ID. So we need to first set this. So we're going to say ID is false to begin with to make sure that this actually exists. And then we're going to create in a little try block just here, again, to protect ourselves from errors. We're going to say ID equals document query selector holder h1. So again, where the ID is stored. And then we say dataset note ID. So that will grab the note ID from the dataset. Just make sure that's lowercase. And then down here, just want to add a catch just here. And then what we need to do is down here, before we run our confirm, is just say if ID does not equal false, then we can run the rest of this code. So that just makes sure that we actually have an ID on the page. This isn't an empty note, so to speak. So this is actually something there for it to delete. So later on, we'll create the delete note function in our background page, but now we have our delete function just here, and we have our save event listener. So now we need to create our save page function to make sure that this is all going to work. So we'll just save that for a second and reload our page just to check that everything's working. Okay, so it's all looking good at the minute. So now we're going to go back and work on our save function. So before we save our note, we need to make a couple of checks on the actual information. So first, we're going to make sure that there is a title. So we're going to say if title. So in other words, if the title is empty, we're going to make an alert and say, please enter a title. Really simple. And then we're also going to return false so that we don't continue running the rest of this function. So to test this, we could refresh this, create a new note and try and click save. And you can see here it says, please enter a title. And if we do enter one and press save, we don't get that error message. So that's good. So now we need to make sure that we check if this is a new note or if it's an existing note. So to do that, we're going to say if ID equals undefined. So if it hasn't been set yet, so when we check up here where we fetch our ID, we can see if it's a brand new note, we remove that data attribute from the data set. So it's either going to be the actual ID or undefined. So we're going to add a check in here to see if it is undefined. And if it is, we're going to set our ID here into something that we can make sure we can reference, and we can check this in the back end to make sure we generate one from Firebase. So for now, we'll just give it a random name, something like empty autogen. So remember to auto generate this, something like that. And then in here, if we do have an ID, we can grab all the information and update our window object straight away. So what this is going to do is update the sidebar with any icon or title changes. So we'll just say document, query selector, pages holder. We want to grab the list item. So that'll be data, note ID. Then we'll pass in the ID we had. So we know here that the ID exists because it's in this else block. So we just pass that in. Then we'll just say inner text equals icon. Then we'll add a space. It's probably better to put the icon in a span element or something, but for now this is fine. So we'll just put a space and then put title. So that should update the title here. So we'll just test this. So all it's going to do now is change that title. It's not going to save anything to the database just yet. But if we go back over here, use our existing note and change the icon and the title, and then press save. If we look over in the sidebar, you can see it updates the icon over here. So that's great. We also need to make sure that we are updating the window object as well. So we'll say window notes, put in the note ID, and then set the title, and so on for the icon and post body. Okay, so after we've got underneath this if statement just here, we're going to send all of this information to our background page. So similar to what we did with our delete function, where we made the checks and then pushed it to our background page, we're going to do the same thing here. So we're just going to say Chrome runtime send message, and we're going to set our command. So our command here will be post note. So post note, and then we're going to pass in some data again. But this time we have a little bit more data to pass through. So we're going to create an object just here, and this will have our ID, which will be our ID, title is our title, and then the body is here, and then the icon. So we're passing all of these variables through in an object just here. And then we need to make sure that, again, we listen for a response. So after this second closing bracket just here, we're going to put a comma and then listen for any callbacks in here. So that is how you submit your new note to the database. But once this has been in the database, we need to update our page again. So what we need to do here is inside of the response callback just here, we're going to add some more code. So we're going to put this all in a try block because you never know, there could be a problem with the server and it might change the response. So we'll just put this in here to be sure. So we'll just make sure we catch any errors. But in here, we're first going to set a variable here of object as our response. We're going to update the note ID of the current selected note. So in case we've created a brand new note, we need to make sure that now this has been pushed to the database, that we update that ID. So because it was empty or undefined before, Firebase will generate an ID for us automatically. So now is where we can actually set that hit just here. So we'll just say query selector, holder, h1, make sure to put a dot there because it's a class. And then we're just going to say dataset note ID equals object ID. So we're going to update that. And then we're going to update our local storage as well to make sure that this is now the most recent note that we've looked at. So we'll say local storage set item, so similar to what we did before. And this will be notes last open page, and that'll also be that same ID. So finally, because this is now a saved note, we can show the delete button again. So to do that, we'll just do document query selector delete page, and then style display block. And then after all of this code here, we want to fetch our notes again, just to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date notes from the database. So that's similar to what we're doing over here. This is just a slightly more reliable version of it because it could take a little moment for the database to update. So we have this check that we do first and update the sidebar, and then we update it properly afterwards. Over here, so that's still inside this block. So over here we can add a console log in case there's any errors, which can be useful during development. So we'll just put that in there for now. So that is what we have down here. Now we need to make these functions on our background page so that we can actually add this information to our database or delete it from our database. So over here we're in our Firebase.js file. So we've made some space down here. So where we have our message command check here for fetch notes, we need to add another check similar to this for our delete note. So that's what we're going to start with first. So we'll say message command equals delete note. So that's where the code will be for deleting our note, and then we're going to add another check for posting a note. So we'll say if message command equals post note. So that should match up with the commands here and here. So as long as that matches up, we have our areas to push the code through here. So first we're going to work on our delete function. So what we need to do is first grab the note ID that we want to delete. So we'll say we're going to set a variable here of note ID, and this will be equal to message data ID. So again, this is the data just here, so message data, and then it's the ID part of this object. So that's where we get the ID from. And then we'll put this all inside a try block. Again, we want to make sure that we catch any errors. We'll send a response here if there's an error. But inside here, we're going to call our database. So we'll set a variable name here. So we're going to say delete note equals Firebase, and then we call database just here. And then we want to pass in a reference. So we have database and we say ref, and this will be /notes / the note ID that we want to remove. So that will just be note ID just here. We should also make sure in here that this note ID isn't empty. Otherwise that would remove all of our notes from Firebase. So we just want to say if note ID does not equal isn't empty, and then we'll put all of that in here just to be completely sure. But otherwise that'll be our thing just here. Then we want to say remove like that. And then so long as this is successful, we're going to say response. This is where we're using this part of the thing up here. So this will send a response back to our app.js. So we'll say, pass an object, and we'll say type result. You can change the format of this if you want, just to be sure that you have a success and an ID here. That's all we really need. So we'll say result, and then status, success, and then we're passing our ID. Says our note ID, and then we'll put the actual request here as well, so the whole message object, in case that's useful for debugging. But otherwise, that will send the response just there. And then if there was an error, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to error, and then we'll change this here from ID to data, and then put the error just there. And we'll also log it to the console, so we can look in the background page.html in the extensions page on Chrome. So we'll just say error and then pass that in just there. So that's our delete note function working. So we'll test this in a moment, but we'll just first get our save note function created as well, so we can test them together. So in this area down here, we have our post note. This is where we're going to add this code. So first, we're going to grab all of the parts of the data object that we passed through. So we're going to set all of these variables again, just to make it easier and clear of what we're actually accessing at each part of this. So we'll set our title, which will be message data title. I'll code all of these out and then come back to you. Okay, so that's them all typed out. Again, we're going to put a try block here to catch any errors. So inside this code here, we're going to check for the empty ID check we made earlier. So we'll say if note ID equals, and then we'll just double check what this was. So down here, we called it empty autogen. So we'll copy that and paste that in here. So if the note is empty, we need to make sure that Firebase is going to generate a new ID for us. So we do that by saying, we're setting a variable just here called new note. And this will be equal to Firebase database. And then we pass through the reference here. First, we need to make sure that we're not using that autogen. So down here is where we generate it automatically, just to keep things straightforward. So in here, we can pass through our actual note ID. So it'll be / notes, and then we put the note ID again. So note ID, like this. And then we just say update, and then pass in object of our information. So its title is here, icon here, and body, like that. So that should mean that that all worked, and then we'll actually pass in a response again. So exactly the same as what we did for our delete function. We want to say type is result, status, success. We'll pass our ID again, so we can use this where we need it. So that'd be note ID. And then we'll pass in the request as well, message. So then in the else block down here, that's where we know that we haven't set our ID yet. So I almost was going ahead of myself a little bit there. So here we need to make sure that we get a new key generated. So that's going to be our first variable here, will be new post key, and that will be Firebase database ref. So we have this empty this time, and then we just say child of notes. So it knows that that's where we want to add this note into, is the notes child of our database. And then we just say push key. So it gives us a new random unique key here. And then we can do the same thing we did before. So new post or new note in here. So that'd be Firebase database ref. And then we do / notes, and then / our new post key just here. And then because this is a brand new note, instead of saying update, we're going to say set. And then we do exactly the same thing by passing through that object again. So that'd be title. It's title, icon. So that's everything just there. And then we're going to set a console log here for debugging. That would just be our new note ID, like that. And then we'll set a response. So exactly the same as up here, except where we passed in our ID just here, we're going to use our new post key rather than the note ID. Otherwise that'll be passing back that empty autogen function just here. So that's almost everything. We just need to make sure we pass in a response for the error. So we'll just copy this here. We'll say status error, and then exactly the same as what we did before. We'll change this from ID to data, and this to our error just here. So we'll just grab the console log we used up here and put that there, just to keep it all consistent. So that should be the create and delete part. So let's just go and test this now. So we'll first go to our Chrome extension settings page and just make sure we refresh this so it's got the brand new code. So we've gone to our extensions page here. Here's the new tab notes extension, and we're going to click refresh. So that should all be up to date. So now we're going to go in here, click on new note, and we're going to just call it new note test. Set a new icon, add some content down here, and then we're just going to say save. And we can see our note's been added over here, and if we check the console, we can see that we have our new randomly generated ID up here of our new note. And then if we go in the side over here, we can see we can switch between these two. And if we go to this new note test and delete it and say yes, we can see it's been removed from the sidebar as well and from the database. So that is how you can create a really simple but really powerful extension for your new tab using Firebase and a Chrome extension. And you can create this new tab extension that will have your notes that's inspired by Notion. Now, if you like this series, feel free to let me know. Subscribe to the channel as well for more content like this. And I'll be planning on adding a new follow-up to this series, which takes some advanced steps for this. So how you can paste in links, similar to Notion as well, more ways that you can format your text, and perhaps organizing the tabs down the side here so that you can reorder them, have different sections, and more advanced functionality for this extension. Anyway, thanks for watching.